For those of you who've seen me before and who watch regularly, you know that one of my big themes is trying to reawaken the excitement of early gaming from the 1960s and the 1970s to bring it into the present gaming situation. And that's what I'm going to do today. I'm Galen, and Galen's got Parkinson's. When I first bought my figures, what you did was you went and bought some soldiers, usually soldiers you could afford. Britons were always great, figures, lovely, but they were expensive for the likes of me. So you go to town with your mum and dad, with your pocket money, and you can either buy one Britain's soldier, or you could buy a box of Airfix soldiers. Well, you might get 48 figures. It was a no-brainer. First figures I ever bought in the 1960s were Robin Hood's men from the Airfix range, and my brother got World War II Russians. And you sort of learnt about what you were buying in the periods. My dad was a veteran of the Second World War, so he helped us when we were starting to buy World War II things. And we very quickly went on from what we now call 20mm Airfix onto the bigger Airfix figures, the sort of 54mm. I like the not modern, but the Western German army. They were sort of blue-grey plastic colour. But you could get the Afrika Korps, and that's when I learned that it's pronounced Corps, not Corpse, from my dad. I had an uncle who'd been in the 8th Army, so when we got the 8th Army figures out, all the uncles would be round and they'd be getting them out. So, look at that with me, I'll be him. And yeah. So they were all chatting about the war. I had an uncle who was killed in the RAF. All the others were in the army, apart from my Uncle Fred, who was too young. And so they were all suddenly talking about the war. You know, this person, no, Dad, they didn't talk about the war. My family did. My dad loved it. Worst thing that happened to my dad was being invalided out. He hated it. He wanted to stay in. He would proper gutted. So we bought soldiers, and we fought games, and we played. We threw Lego at them, or we twinked elastic bands at them. And we didn't buy a boxed set, or we couldn't have afforded one anyway, to be right. And then when I went to the War Games Club in 1972, they were very, very strict about using metal figures. So we had to buy metal figures. A shop in Doncaster called the Stamp Corner. And they had coins and stamps upstairs, but downstairs they had soldiers. And one of the lads at the club used to work there. So you'd tell him on a Friday night, War Games Club, what you were collecting. And they'd stock it. So lots of us were doing Napoleonic Wars. So they'd have Napoleonic figures all round in little shelves with numbers. And you could tell them. But my mum used to pick mine up on a Wednesday. And she would never have known. So I just gave them a generic order. So our Galen wants on a Wednesday 4 of his British infantry. So she used to go in with me money, and she used to pop in and say, give our Galen's order, and they'd give her them and he'd cross it off. And that worked really well. And then you get your paint from Woolworths, Home Brawl enamel paint, big bottle of Terps, and you'd be happy as Larry. So we did that, and they were all 25mm. Then in 1973, 74, probably 73, I went to the club one day, and these guys had some of those big trees, Britain's trees, big whopping oak trees, and they were playing with elves and dwarfs and halflings and goblins. And I went, in my naivety, Hobbit. And they went, it's Lord of the Rings. Don't say The Hobbit, that's a children's book. I'd never heard of Lord of the Rings. So I rushed off and bought it and read it. Loved it. Never changed my life completely. The figures were made by Miniature Figurines, who got a license from the Tolkien estate to make figures to play the battles in Lord of the Rings. So there were still battles, like we were doing Napoleonic battles, using War Games Research Group. Then we started to do fantasy battles using the War Games Research Group medieval rules. And we said, Welsh bowmen are like elves because they did good. But it was we were still wargaming, we were still fighting battles. And I was 74, I went to college in 75. while I was at college in 78, big revelation, Dungeons and Dragons came along. And I bought one of the earliest, I've still got them. We'll do a review of them one day. But the first three modules, proper Dungeons and Dragons modules, were G1, G2, G3. And it was a trilogy about a giant. The middle one was really hard, the Glacial Rift of the Frost Giant Jarl. And like I say, I've still got them. And then Gary Gygax did a special S1, Tomb of Horrors. And it was for all the people who'd helped develop the game in America to give them a hard game at a conference, so they had something to do. And it was a really hard, thinky game rather than a biffy, bashy goblin game. So I played that. Must have been one of the first people in the country to play Dungeons and Dragons, because I was playing it in 78 and it only arrived in 78. So, but again, we weren't buying figures from Gary Gygax or from the Americans. We were getting figures from Hinchcliffe, miniature figurines, sword and sorcery range, Asgard, Grenadier, Citadel. And you bought what figures you wanted and you fitted them into the game you wanted. We weren't buying boxes and figures, we were buying figures, and we weren't buying rules. There were no rules. If you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, there were rules for Dungeons and Dragons. But there weren't rules for what happened to those figures when they left the dungeon and they were out and about in the world. To be honest, in the early days, it wasn't even the world. And then Citadel came along, and Citadel started to do things like RuneQuest, HeroQuest, Rogue Trader. And then they brought out the Old World manual. I always thought it was a bit of a rival to the Dungeons and Dragons world. And the idea, I suppose, was everything now takes place within this world. I'll give you a campaign map. But then, again, it wasn't long before it became Warhammer and 40k. Still, the historical gamers, we weren't falling into these traps, if you like. We were still buying the figures we wanted. If you like Essex, you bought Essex. If you wanted Dixons, you bought Dixons. If you wanted Hinchcliffe, you bought Hinchcliffe. You bought what you wanted. And that went on for a long time. Really, until, I would say, in my experience, it's been the last 10 years. The club I'm at the moment, I've been at for 13 years. And when I went, the historical gamers would play historical games. And we'd take it in turns. So the first night I went, some guys were playing muskets and tomahawks. And you all sat round, and the bloke who had muskets and tomahawks rules would umpire the game. And you played the game and you learnt a bit about muskets and tomahawks. And then the following week somebody did rapid fire. And then the following week somebody did Shako. And so on. And round it went. But rapid fire isn't like bolt action. A rapid fire, you use ordinary dice. You use your ordinary figures. You can use any figures you like. As long as the World War II, we use 20 mil. But they don't have to be. But ours are. But then bolt action came along, and suddenly that changes things. Like when we play Shako, Shako don't produce figures. So when we start to look at pirate games recently, it's not long before people start talking about Blood and Plunder. And then you look up Blood and Plunder, and you've got to buy their, it makes it look as if you've got to buy their ship. And their crews, they come in little boxes. It's like Legion. You want a crew, you get them. You have to buy that box with them in. Can't make your own up. You've got to have a crew. And that's, to me, is going wrong. And it's going wrong very quickly. People now are talking to me about games. We played Test of Honor, Japanese game. And I think Warlord did the figures. People buying Test of Honor, and then they buy Warlord figures. And you think, I like the Perry's figures better. I like lead figures. Foundry makes some nice figures. But they're old-fashioned companies to me because you don't go to Foundry or to Perry's and say, what game are you playing that's got figures in it? Games in a box. Oh, games in your head. Imagination. We didn't have that option. You bought the figures you loved. And you made up your own rules. Now, it's not for everybody, but have you not tried it? Some of you might not have tried it. Can I set you a challenge as I'm ending? Pick 3 figures. Throw a dice if you like. Select several shelves if you've got them, or just grab 3 figures. Any genre, whatever you like. Don't have any rules. Just sit down with 3 figures and a table and invent your own game. Do it on your own, do it with your mates. Get a couple of beers in, break the scotch open, have some crisps, have a nut. But invent your own game. See what happens. Might be fun. You might never do it again, but can I please ask, at least one of you, give it a go. If you've never done it, if you've never invented your own game, have a crack. Tell me what you think. Ta-ra, Chuck.